Liebert. I'm a program manager at Comtech Telecommunications, and I have the pleasure of moderating this session with our fantastic panelists. We do have a chat function, which I'm going to invite everyone to utilize. Feel free to plop in your questions, particularly when our panelists are speaking, and we will get to those when we have the time. This is definitely a viewer audience driven webinar format. So feel free to ask any questions, even if they are off topic, that you may have about Next Generation 911, GIS related, or just general Next Generation 911 questions. And with that, I am going to start with Matt, and he will introduce himself.
Hi everyone, Matt Gerike. Currently work for Virginia Geographic Information Network, which is part of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we are organized with our public safety communications folks that are in charge of 911 for the state and providing support for the 911 Services Board, and a team of regional coordinators that work to support GIS and next generation or 911 across the Commonwealth. So I wasn't planning on how much of an introduction to give. So that is who I am. That is my role, and I'm happy to be here today to speak about some of our experiences and where we're at in our journey. And I look forward to hearing some of the other perspectives from the other panelists, because if there's one thing true about anything that's state-based or locality-based, there are similarities across the board and there are differences across the board. And it's clearly not a one-size-fits-all approach or one right way to do it. A lot of it depends on the unique circumstances of localities and different factors, and that's present in different states. And so I'm really excited to be here with Megan, because I was born a Hoosier and interested to hear what Indiana's doing, and spent 5 wonderful years of my life at grad school at Kansas State University, and look forward to hearing what Sherry has to tell us about the state of Next Generation 911 in Kansas. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Megan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Matt, thanks for the fantastic segue. I wasn't aware of the connection that you had with Indiana and Kansas, so this is a really great trio. I'm excited to be a part of it. Good afternoon. My name is Megan Compton. I am the Indiana Geographic Information Officer. My office is within our Indiana Office of Technology, and we were established in 2007. I'm the second person to be in this role. I've been in the role for almost 3 years. Worked in GIS across multiple state government agencies for about 13 years. And in every role that I've had, I've worked in a public safety entity, and always in support in the background of public safety, driving public safety data. So in my last role before this job, actually, we were in charge of trying to navigate the thresholds and all of the different pieces and nuances of statewide GIS data. In particular for 911 and for CAD systems statewide. And learned in that role, really getting into the weeds, and around that time started learning about Next Gen 911. We found a pretty significant gap in Indiana in the knowledge base between our PSAPs and our 911 centers. I'm sorry, and our GIS folks. That in some counties, we have folks that are supporting GIS and 911, and some counties they're entirely separate. So we have 92 counties in Indiana. So having them break up into different areas and really at this in different ways, it was disconnected, and that disconnect was a little bit concerning. So that was about 2014. I started getting involved in those areas. Now, in my current role, I also have the pleasure of sitting on the state 911 board. So, and the position there is to provide GIS advice to the board and to help see where we need to go in the next phase. We have a lot of really great technical support on the 911 side. We have done amazing things we have our statewide ESInet fully deployed. We're actually working on a redundant ESInet, and we have statewide text to 911. We're really far down the path of getting statewide next-gen deployed. We're just a little slow on the GIS side. And some states, as Matt said, are approaching this differently. Some states are getting all of their GIS in order, and then they're going to work on the ESInet. Or you have multiple ESInets and one single GIS solution. For us in Indiana, we're going to end up, I suspect, with one statewide ESInet, as like I said, we already have, but with multiple GIS solutions. So what's the right way to try and coordinate that? In my role, that's one of the responsibilities that I have, is to help coordinate state GIS activities. And that's both to support state agencies as well as to support and connect local entities, universities, private organizations, and create and make available that data for public use, but also for use from state government. So what we found is that the crosswalk into multiple state agencies, the need for address data at the local level to support 911 has created a great effect, and we're trying to work within that right now. There's a lot of moving pieces, so I'm looking forward to unpacking some of that with you guys today.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Sherry.
Thank you. I'm Sherry Massey. I actually work full-time as an IT director for a small county in Kansas, Dickinson County, and I have been associated with the NG9-1-1 effort kind of since the beginning. My very first role in county government was as a 911 dispatcher, and I did that transitioning towards training and then technical support for about 12 years total. And while I was doing that, I was going to school for GIS. And so I was lucky enough to be able to transition into a GIS position. And not long after that, the NG9-1-1 effort in the state of Kansas kind of really started kicking off. So I got into GIS in 2007, and in 2012, the coordinating council of the state of Kansas, the 911 Coordinating Council of the state of Kansas, kicked off their GIS project. As Megan had suggested, everybody kind of comes at this from a different direction, and the review they had done of sort of the state of readiness in Kansas for NG9-1-1 identified that the biggest hurdle to getting it accomplished was going to be GIS, and so they decided to tackle it first. And we've had a really robust GIS program in NG9-1-1. It really kicked off the ground and started getting some speed in 2014. And we've been through a whole lot in that process. The state has transitioned largely to Next-Gen 911. We are on an ESInet, hosted phone system, things like that. Fortunately, we've kind of had GIS as a leadership role in a lot of the NG9-1-1 to take us there. So there's been a lot of bumps along the way, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to kind of talk through some of that with you guys today, to hear how other people are handling things, people with more mature next-gen system from a technical basis, and just really happy to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. So we're going to kind of kick off I know the three of you kind of mentioned a little bit, but for your state, how is next generation GIS? How has it been kind of developed from the beginning, and then also how is it managed in your state? Do you rely on local management? Is it more on a region by region basis, or are you in the position where all the PSAPs submit their GIS in whatever state up to a state entity, and then kind of the state itself does a lot of the work? And we'll start with Megan.
Sure, thanks, Melissa. So in our state, as I alluded to earlier, we found the gap in education at first. So the GIS portion of 911 was kind of an afterthought, I think. Really, the state put a lot of money and a lot of effort, the state meaning the 911 board, on developing that ESInet. They did not. They wanted to assume that cost and support the PSAPs in that way, to not have to have them build their own. The GIS was not a component that was considered in the early days of that development, and it's a portion that the board believes is a local level effort. So that's kind of where our office helps to come in and provide some of that coordination. So our state council is helping quite a bit in the coordination and sharing out information. That's really where we started. We started with education, attending multiple conferences, from NENA and APCO over to our state GIS conferences, government technology conferences, to try and educate folks in and around this area, to try and say, these are the steps that we believe where there's that crosswalk, where there's going to need extra effort on the GIS side, to help support the next gen 911 efforts. So where we stand now is we have interest in having state coordination. We just this past year supplied a state standard for GIS address and center lines. That standard follows almost exactly to the NENA standard, and goes up a few more steps. Maybe some states have a few more steps further to help us achieve other efforts as well, and then backs off a few things like we don't have a need for the fields for international addresses. We're not a border state. So setting up that standard gave us and our GIS folks within the county the first step to say, how do I get my data into the right format so that it's ready for next gen 911? Some of the education that's going to continue is going to include identifying exactly where GIS comes in and who is responsible for what. I think that's an area where people are a little bit fuzzy, meaning if you're responsible for call delivery, where GIS is involved in the next gen format for call delivery, and then where it actually goes on the dispatch side is a separate, technically separate piece. But in my world and in my thinking, I want them to be the same data set. But because of the different responsibilities at the local level versus the state level, there's a chance they might be different data sets. And how does that, what impact that has, we have yet to fully unpack. The other effort we haven't really understood yet is our police are also responsible for 911 answering. So they're a secondary PSAP. And if we approach multiple county efforts individually without having a centralized state deployment of GIS for next gen 911, I don't know how that works from local government transferring calls to the state, and where that technical breakdown might happen. So those are some things and some lessons that we need to still understand. So Melissa, that's I think that answered your question well.
Yep, it did. Thank you. So Sherry, what is your state doing for GIS development and management? Local, regional? You have a centralized state office?
It is local. The 911 Coordinating Council contracts with our state clearinghouse, the Data Access and Support Center, our GIS clearinghouse, to do a little bit of the management of the data, but it is largely driven, almost entirely driven by local effort. We put together a state standard, and the Coordinating Council had funds available that they put towards GIS, which was a huge step up for us. So we had a project where the data was evaluated. Every PSAP, every county put their GIS data, their addresses, and if they had them, and road center lines particularly, up for evaluation so that sort of a gap analysis could be done. The difference between what they had and the standard we were going to set, so we had some idea of the distance we had to go in the middle, and then the funding became available as grants to the PSAPs to have the data remediated to that standard by a vendor, or they could choose to do the work internally, and And of course, as everyone knows, you have different levels of skill and different levels of understanding in different places. So most of our counties chose to have a vendor do the remediation. The data was brought to the standard and then essentially returned back to them, and they've been maintaining it ever since. We have had, I think we're up to almost 3 years now of 100% participation. We require them to submit data at a minimum on a quarterly basis, more often if they feel like they have changes that could impact the 911 system. And all of that data is submitted to DASC, to our data clearinghouse, where it is processed into a statewide data set and pushed into the ESInet. When I say processed, we have quite a bit that we do with it on the back end in terms of getting it ready to meet requirements that our spatial interface vendor has set, or to meet requirements of the mapping system that's involved in the call handling software, that kind of thing. But we take the data that's given to us by the locals and process it at the state level, or at the council level, I should say, because it isn't quite the whole state. It's voluntary participation, so we have some counties that are doing different things. And we process it and push it on through to the various components. So we are very proud of the system that we have together. The education component was probably one of the biggest hurdles that we had, teaching 911 people about GIS and GIS people about 911 so they can start working together on this and begin communicating with a similar vocabulary, or at least a similar understanding that allowed their kind of vocabularies to mesh. And that has been an ongoing effort. Outreach and training has been a huge portion of the council's role. So when I say the effort is local, I mean all of the GIS effort is local. What we're doing at the council level is that training piece, the coordination piece, and then the post-processing, if you will, to prep the data for the various vendors that are going to process it or use it on the back end.
Great, thank you. And Matt, what is Virginia doing?
All of the above. So it's really, there are aspects similar to Indiana, there are aspects similar to Kansas. And so in Virginia, we are a Commonwealth, so we're almost as home rule as home rule states get in terms of that. And we have 134 localities, counties or independent cities, and that trickles into 123 PSAPs. And so all data is maintained locally, usually by local staff, and we run the range from localities having 30 people doing GIS in the locality to a friend of mine. He does the GIS, but he also has 4 other really important jobs in his role at the county. About 25% of our localities don't have anybody in-house, so they outsource the routine GIS data maintenance to a vendor or a planning development council of those sorts of geography in different areas. And so the data maintenance is local. That's where addresses are assigned. That's where roads are approved. That's where roads are named. And so that's really key for us. But at the state level, what we've done for a number of years, I think close to 10, is do a data call twice a year, address points, road center lines, parcels, structure footprints, administrative boundaries, and sometimes we add in other things because our team integrates those data sets into the statewide data sets. And so we ask for that data twice a year. We publish that out 4 times a year because it takes a while to process. As we merge those into the state data sets, we adapt all of the local data to our state standards. Those date from about 2014 to 2016, depending on the layer. And so for folks that still maintain their data in the local schema, we do have the tools developed to standardize that. And that really helps us out as a state because Virginia Department of Transportation doesn't maintain their own road center lines. They use the road center lines that we assemble based on the locality data, and they base their linear referencing off of that. And so we feel like we built some of those relationships and workflows to where that model works really well. The localities tend to like it because they don't have 10 different state agencies asking them for the data. They get asked twice a year by one group, and then that's managed and provided in a standard format, both as REST services and data downloads for the other users of it. Some of those localities are part of regional groups and share data for different purposes. Some of our very urban regions do it. Some of our very rural regions do it. And we see that play out in both places. How that fits into the NG9-1-1 deployment approach is kind of interesting. Since 2016, when we do those data calls, we've also run them through data metrics, kind of like that gap analysis type thing. We provide report cards based on GIS, address point, road center line, attribute geometry issues. We do an annual statewide pull of MSAG and ALLI data. So we do an MSAG ALLI comparison for all the data that we have, and we give that feedback back to the localities so that they can improve their data, not just for 911, but for all the other uses of that data that maybe the NENA data model doesn't quite support yet. And so we have those feedback loops, and we have the data flowing both ways, working both ways, feedback working both ways. But when it comes to NG9-1-1 deployment and working with the spatial interface, we're doing a different route than Kansas. In Kansas, they send that data to DASC, DASC assembles it, and they upload it. In Virginia, all of our localities or folks working on the behalf of localities are working with the next generation core services provider and uploading that data themselves. And so we have 123 PSAPs, 124 provisioning entities logging into our next generation core system, uploading their data, their provisioning boundary, their address points, their road center lines, PSAP boundaries, ESB layers, and directly working with the vendor providing those services. We chose that route because it is local data. That's the data that they're responsible for. And if there are problems or challenges in that data, they can fix it the quickest. They can fix it right their way because that's their responsibility, and they can get it updated quicker rather than having it trickle back to the state for us to figure out, or for the state for us to pass on back to them and pass back up, and those types of things. And so especially with some of our localities that are very large, very urban, and continue to grow and change at a rapid pace, that sort of strategy made sense for us. What that means is that we spend a lot of our time training, coordinating, doing outreach with the local PSAPs, the local GIS folks, the contractors that they may use, and the folks working on the NG Next Generation Core Services side, making sure that no matter where anybody's at for whatever reason, the data is working, the data is flowing, the standards are being met, and the systems are working as expected.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And that actually segues really well into our next question, which is, so what is the approach your state's taking to deploy NG9-1-1? And this is for an ESINet and for a spatial interface or SI. Are you taking a vendor solution, or has your state decided to kind of do it more homegrown in-house? Is it a little bit of a hybrid? And then why did your state decide on that approach? And Matt, I'll actually turn the question first to you.
All right, thank you. So in 2018, Fairfax County, Virginia, just up there south of DC, did an RFP for a ESINet solution, Next Generation 911 I3 ESINet solution. The state participated in that. The outcome of that purchasing proposal was that they selected the AT&T solution, and AT&T partners with Entrado on kind of the GIS spatial interface side to provide that solution. It was the state's assessment at that time that if the state did their own RFP, they didn't expect to get a different result. And there was cooperative language built into that contract. Another region of Virginia did their own RFP, came up with the same result, and selected AT&T and Entrado. So the mechanism that is working in Virginia is that it's locality choice. That's very important to us. But the localities that have gone through an RFP process both selected AT&T as the vendor and have worked with us to make sure that all the other localities can purchase off that contract. Some folks in the National Capital Region are leveraging that as well. So that's kind of the approach that Virginia's taken. It might have turned out that we might have been multiple ESINet or multiple GIS provider type piece, but it looks like we're all couple wrinkles we can get into if we go down those rabbit holes later. All of the primary PSAPs in Virginia that are physically connected to selective routers and receive funds from the Virginia 911 Wireless Fund will be going that route, and so using AT&T's ESINet and using Entrado as the spatial interface for that. And it is our job is the state to whatever their choice is, support them and helping them get to where they need to go. And that's really important because we have a legislative mandate that everybody be on a next generation 911 I3 system by July 1st, 2023. And so that's another piece that kind of fits into to both of those strategies. I believe I touched on all the points of the question.
You did.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Matt. How about Megan?
So the strategy to deploy the ESINet portion, as I said, was a statewide strategy. So that's very much coordinated by our 911 board in collaboration. So our first statewide ESINet is an in-digital managed ESINet, and then the secondary is the AT&T ESINet that's going to go on top as a redundant. And they're currently deploying that now in several counties. And the success of that project has just been the major focus of the 911 board since for several years since the decision and the deployment of that began. So as far as the spatial interface, there's not, to my knowledge, a clear solution on that element yet. We do right now in the counties that have transitioned to Next Gen 911 are still routing calls with ALI data with the MSAG, not utilizing the spatial interface fully and the way that it's architected out in the I3 architecture. So that's the GIS pieces that are probably likely going to be built and come from the counties. And they're doing so now on various levels of support. We'll, I think, touch a little bit, maybe a little bit on that a little bit later, but there's counties are building up and improving their data. And then I think the strategy right now is that they will share that data with the telco and with the ESINet provider in order to use that to route the calls. Again, it's kind of a patchwork approach, much kind of like Virginia. The idea of the home rule state is part of what's driving those decisions and keeping things in a separate format. So we're just hoping to try and bring the education piece and what's come out of not having a standardized way of deploying that GIS has been a grassroots education strategy. We've partnered, like I said, I think earlier with NENA and APCO and our state GIS council to provide local education and training. We've had some vendor support in that just to provide here's the strategy that you might consider. That's been not a vendor-driven solution, but very much just by seeing the void and needing to fill that gap. So that the having the GIS portion separate from the full 911 portion, from the full ESInet portion, I'm going to see how that unfolds. Also, the partnerships that we're trying to understand now is where we involve the telcos and trying to get their data updated and what's the strategy there. So that's yet to be determined.
Okay, thank you, Megan. And Sherry.
So we're going to sound very much like Matt. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Oh, nope, it went away, I think. I'm going to sound very much like Matt because the Kansas 911 Coordinating Council went out for RFP for ESInet services and awarded the contract to AT&T's National ESInet Solution, which includes, of course, the Intrado spatial interface, which is what he had spoken of. We're a little bit different in that participation is voluntary in Kansas. So we have 117 PSAPs, and 13 of those PSAPs are 117 primary PSAPs, and 13 of those are associated with the Mid-America Regional Council, which is the Missouri and Kansas region around the Kansas City metropolitan area. So they kind of do their own thing, independent of the rest of us. So the remaining PSAPs are all on the system or not on a voluntary basis, and of those 99 have chosen to join the system. And the remaining few either haven't made a decision about how or when they want to move to Next Gen 911. We do not have a statutory mandate yet. They either haven't made a decision about how they want to do that, or they are under a contract that they want to get the full value out of and will be considering coming on the system or doing something different once that contract ends. So for the 99 that are on the system, though, it is AT&T's ESInet and Intrado is the spatial interface. One of the things, as we sort of started that whole process, I mentioned that we did GIS first, and kind of our relationship with the spatial interface is a little different from a lot of others because we had already set a standard and we had already had people begin submitting data when we first got any kind of idea of what the configuration of the spatial interface would be like. When the RFP was finally awarded and we knew who the vendor was and everything else, we already had a system that had sort of matured to the point that we were concerned about passing down a massive amount of changes to the individual PSAPs and to the individual GIS maintainers. And that's part of the reason that we do the transition in there. So for us, the differences between what the spatial interface vendor required and what we had already set up for the locals are differences that we have done our best to absorb at the sort of statewide level. So when we receive the data, we make those changes to push it in to accommodate that SI vendor. One of the things, while we're talking about ESInets and SIs, one of the things that I really wish we had realized early on in the process is how formative who the SI vendor is and how they interpret the standards was going to be to what the data needed to turn out to be, because that was a huge adjustment we had to make, and we were very fortunate that we had the expertise centrally to be able to adjust that data. We spent a lot of political capital getting people doing their data maintenance, and to then turn around and tell them, oops, sorry, we need you to change a bunch of stuff, would have lost some people. And we haven't lost anyone because of that. So that choice of spatial interface vendor can be very impactful, and it's just something I kind of want to bring up in this. But for us, it's a one-stop shop, all contract.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. Definitely a little bit of a mix. So Matt, you said you wanted to add one more thing before we move on.
Yeah, just one more thing. And listening to Megan and Sherry, there's one other key difference with what Virginia's trying to do. And so while we worked with GIS data prep ahead of time, we are really syncing all three parts together at the same time. And so in our deployments right now, we're working with all of our localities that they'll have special construction for redundant fiber or a method of diversity for calls to get to the PSAP. The same time that we're working with trunking onto the AT&T system, with the CHE or CPE equipment being at the I3 standard to handle that information and have all those meet at the end at the same time the GIS is ready and through Entrada's process, and all of those feed together with the cutover to a next gen I3 PSAP. So it's a little bit different and trying to coordinate all those at the same time than the strategy of having an EZNet and then trying to bring the GIS along that I know some states are doing. And it's a little bit different than you know, having the GIS in place and kind of bringing these other things ready. And so Virginia is that they're, no matter how you cut it, they're cats to herd in next gen 911. And there are advantages to disadvantages to both depending on your circumstances. But I feel like I can fairly argue that Virginia's approach is shrinking maybe the overall deployment window to go full I3. Geospatial call routing, EZNet, PSAPs can receive that in I3, but it definitely adds more cats to herd in that compressed time frame. So thank you for letting me jump back in. That's a little variable that I don't think we had touched on or talked about.
No, thank you. So I'm going to take a brief break from our pre-planned questions, and we've been getting some in our chat box. So this kind of just a yes, no, probably across the board, but maybe with a little bit of explanation. But does your state have a GIS, NG-GIS like user group or advisory group made up of GIS professionals that maybe meet together to talk about next generation 911 and or advise the state for GIS next generation 911? And we'll start with Megan.
Sure. So in Indiana, we have our state GIS council that has taken a large leadership role in trying to inform and educate on next gen 911. The separate entities with the state 911 board work on the different sides, the non-GIS functions of 911. And then our state council really works, like I said, at different conferences and educational events to explain what that is looking like. We've talked about efforts like 911 officers bringing your GIS person to work one day, and the opposite happening too, having 911 folks go spend a day in the GIS office. Really building those relationships and taking the folks that we know in the PSAP and introducing them to their county GIS person. Just that is almost as helpful in making sure the two of them can attend one event together virtually now, to where they're hearing the same message. And then because the GIS is managed differently in each county, then we help establish that relationship. And some counties are different, and they might not have the same staffing, right? They have different capabilities. So addressing those and building that local capacity is important for us. So it's mostly, like I said, through our council. Melissa, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Thank you, Megan. I was talking. Sherry, how about your state?
We have the Kansas 911 Coordinating Council has a GIS committee. That committee is the group of people that got together to create the initial GIS standard and still meets now on a quarterly basis to discuss any upcoming issues. And it's made up primarily of local GIS people, but also a couple from state level. And then we have an NG9-1-1 GIS user group to which we invite anyone who is associated with the maintenance of NG9-1-1 GIS data in Kansas. We have webinars every quarter where we kind of give everybody an update and then answer any questions that they have about what's going on and kind of take in any information that they want to provide us about their concerns. We vet potential changes to the standard or the procedures and things like that through the user group. And then we have the Kansas Association of Mappers, which is the GIS professional organization in Kansas. And that user group meets at the CAM conference every year as well for kind of an in-person get-together. So we encourage at all times information to flow in from the locals, but it is really that committee and then the user group meetings where we get good communication back and forth.
Okay, and then let's see, Matt.
So same thing that Indiana and Kansas are doing. One additional thing that that Virginia does a little bit differently is within our unit, we have a regional coordinator model. And so we have 7 regional coordinators that live and work in different regions of Virginia and are responsible for different counties and cities in their area. And many of them have usually monthly PSAP manager meeting or GIS manager meetings or both within their region. And so we also take advantage of those. They have the opportunity to talk with each other with their regional coordinator. Half of our regional coordinators are from a PSAP background, half are from a GIS background. And then they'll occasionally have me in, or sometimes I get questions from that came up that we work to provide information back. Or if we realize that, especially with deployment, if some of our folks on our leading edge are running into things, we turn that into messaging and talking points for our statewide user group, which is really geared around folks asking questions or us answering questions that others have asked to try to provide good information and share strategy with what folks run into.
Okay, thank you. I know we have about 15 minutes. So I think some of these questions from the chat box we'll probably send out a group email in case we don't get to all of them. So I'm going to throw this out to the 3 of you, whomever would like to answer. Can accented characters in 911 systems, do your systems support them?
For us, this is Sherry, and it's a question for us of which component you're talking about. If you're going sort of soup to nuts, no. There are different components that have different capabilities, but right now our what would be the location information server or the LIS is actually for us just the old standard ALI database, and it is being repackaged by Intrado on the back end to meet that I3 standard, and thus it has the limitations that the ALI database has in terms of those characters. So we have a lot of components that can do it, but in the end, you know, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And for us, when it comes to that, it's definitely the database where the telcos are storing the data.
Okay, how are if your states are even addressing the 3-day business turnaround for discrepancies found in data? Have you started looking at that criteria that's outlined in the NENA standards, or is that still on your to-do list of how to address the 3-day business turnaround? I'll go with Megan. I don't know if your jurisdiction's at this point yet.
We are definitely not at that point. It is on the list of things to consider, though, and how to set that up, what that workflow looks like.
Matt, has Virginia looked at this yet?
We're working with it as our first several PSAPs have moved over and our full I3 with geospatial call routing, and what it really comes into is just like legacy 911 has issues and methods of noting different errors or issues with calls. That same concept exists in the I3 environment. And so what we're finding is that, yes, we know there's that expectation, but how that information is worked in the PSAP and how that makes its way to the GIS folks is one of those things that I think, like a lot of other things in next gen and GIS, there are probably a lot of variables of how that will work, depending on the people, depending on the circumstance, depending on that. So we're starting to develop our talking points to that, and making sure that as our PSAPs go live I3, that they're aware of that, hey, whatever procedures you have for misrouted calls or things that may involve address points or road center lines where it may have gotten confused, not wind up in the right place, different information coming over, make sure you look at those processes that you already have and figure that out with the GIS folks, because there is this extra piece of 3 days. Normally we see that folks are pretty quick, pretty responsive to point out potential issues, and it's just kind of closing the loop on it. It's changing a professional practice that is already there, and most folks are already following. It just kind of puts a little bit of a different wrapper on it. So we don't see it as much as inventing a new wheel, as letting folks know that, hey, this wheel just looks a little bit different. There's a I3 hubcap on it rather than what was on it before, and helping folks as they make this transition think about how their other workflow processes and procedures may change, PSAP or GIS or otherwise, as part of this transition.
Okay, are any of the three of your states supporting indoor 911 vertical elevation with the plus or minus of 3 meters?
We're talking about it. I think that's about as good as you can say. We're discussing from a GIS perspective what data sources we might have to be able to produce something that would turn plus or minus 3 meters of an elevation over sea level into something that is actually consumable by a dispatcher usefully. But that is where we are with it, because without the data to give it relevance, that elevation isn't super helpful. And that's what we're hearing from the council and from the various PSAP organizations within the state.
If I can build on that, I think it's important to note that the NENA standards, the framework in NENA's constellation of standards and information, is still working on figuring that out. And so for folks that have worked with NextGen for a while, it took a little while for the GIS data model to come around, and a lot of folks wound up basing their GIS on that. It's, the ideas of those things are not being driven by NENA, they're being driven by the FCC. And so, the point is that everybody's trying to figure it out. But for systems that want to meet the I3 standard, there isn't a standard there yet to follow. There are groups that are working on that and trying to determine the requirements and have recommendations for ways forward. But there does seem to be a little bit of discrepancy between the timelines of where that may happen. And the other critical piece of that really has nothing to do with the PSAPs is the ability of the wireless OSPs, the originating service providers, to be able to deliver a call that has all that information with it. And we see that in some areas of Virginia, and we don't see it in other areas. And that's really that's something that the OSPs have on their plate, which is another part of this.
Thank you. So there is a question that I think actually I can answer. So does Esri have a schema template available to import existing data sets into and then populate missing attributes? So I am aware that NENA actually has a schema template. If you Google the NENA GIS data model, and it will take you to the landing page. There is a link on there with a zipped folder, and it has an empty geodatabase in there in the schema. Thank you very much, Matt. He put it in the chat box. It is also in there is a Esri Python script that you can run on your system, and there is also an open source. And as of now, it is up to date to the GIS data model. I will note that is going through a revision of version 2, and likely when the version 2 comes out, that script and associated geodatabase will be updated. But it is available for jurisdictions to use. Again, at the link that Matt submitted. I am aware that Esri has been working. I think it's their local data model on GIS or on next generation 911 GIS. But is anyone aware of? I don't think they have anything very NENA specific that they've produced yet. Megan, Sherry, Matt, have you seen anything coming out of Esri's shop? No.
Nope.
That I'm aware of.
Okay, perfect. Going down, let's see what time, we have about 8 minutes. So I'm actually going to leave the last 8 minutes to get some advice. So we'll go down the line, and you can either say the biggest challenge and solution that your jurisdiction or your state has come across, or the best piece of advice you can leave our audience with today. And I will start with Megan.
So for us, I think the best piece of advice would definitely start with partnerships, and encouraging folks to utilize the folks, the professionals in your state for their support. We have understanding those related efforts, and those are the partnerships and related efforts. So our partnerships to build the state standard, the folks that are at the table within our state GIS council, those are folks from a wide range of backgrounds with a wide range of expertise. They include folks from universities, private GIS firms, local county municipality, state GIS professionals. That team of experts is really invaluable. So I would encourage you to if you don't have a committee, like Sherry talked about their committee, in our state, we have a similar committee, build that and understand those partnerships that you can work with. And then finding those related efforts. In trying to find the funding for GIS and building this at the local level, that's been a challenge in Indiana. So building the resources and, the importance of statewide addresses, statewide boundaries, statewide center lines, and the way we can use those same data sets for multiple efforts. That approach has helped us quite a bit because we're building a lot of value there, and we're pursuing a build it once, use it many times strategy. The same addresses that can help NG9-1-1 can also build your state geocoder. If you're having any challenges in that area with, well, it's just for one 911 effort, that 911 effort is also going to help our Department of Revenue, our Department of Transportation, our local and regional GIS efforts. So documenting that and sharing out those stories has been really helpful for us in Indiana.
Thank you, Megan. Sherry, what's the biggest piece of advice you'd like to give?
Tell you the truth, it's almost identical. Probably one of the most important things that we picked up along the way is that this is, of course, 911 data, but if it's only 911 data, then the system is just not going to work. You need outside use of that data to truly vet it and to really kind of give a QA of it that matters. And if you look at local GIS shops, which is where at least the information, if not the actual work, has to take place, and you tell them, I need you to make a completely separate data set just for 911, that is simply not going to be maintained with the same kind of vigor that one that would be used universally or as universally as possible will be maintained. And so I think that's really critical. We found that, of course, as I think we've all mentioned, 911 and GIS kind of live in separate silos. Mutual education is really important. A lot of the requirements of the standard involve of just NG9-1-1 in general involve getting information from 911 to GIS, having it properly processed and pushed back into 911's technology, and that education and communication piece between those two sort of disparate worlds really is key. What's more, it's a very big change to both of them. 911 is used to being very, very self-reliant, handling most things on their own, and GIS is not used to being on the kind, usually, not used to being on the kind of time frame that 911 requires to get changes made, data up to standard, and then submitted, and all of this kind of thing. So using the data broadly, but making sure that the GIS and 911 communication is open and that education is there. Those are our biggest takeaways. They're the things that we wish we did better, and the things that we are proudest of what we did.
Great, thank you. And Matt.
So echoing Indiana and Kansas, people, relationships, partnerships, it's all really important. We believe in being transparent, and that's a big part of building that. And so I'm sharing a link to our Virginia dashboard in the chat box that we use to work towards that. It's also important from the state perspective to meet people where they're at, and that may be not just, hey, when this COVID thing is done, can we go out and sit down with them on their turf and answer their questions, but also their different levels of understanding of GIS or of next gen, and you'll have a better job building those relationships if you can make those connections, and a big part of that is knowing that some folks are all over this and have been doing this for a long time, and others maybe not, and so your range of support, your range of documentation may vary. On the technical GIS side, the one biggest piece of advice is ETL is your friend. We do have some localities that they don't use their GIS data for a lot. They've completely changed out their local schema for the NENA data model. And hey, if that's a choice they want to make and it works for them, that's fine. We have other localities that easily push their GIS data into 5 to 10 other systems of record. And I get calls from them, hey, do I need to change this? This is going to break so much stuff. It's like, nope, just treat the NENA data model like any other system of record, business system that you need to push your authoritative GIS into. Come up with something, figure out the ETL, script it, do it automatically, put the time and effort in up front to handle it in a way so that when it will run, it will do it in the same way that each time, and it will tell you if it breaks or it doesn't. And polish those skills. Use that GIS toolkit to make your NG9-1-1 GIS life easier. And that's something that we've talked about numerous times, but we still talk about it because it is helpful to think about and prepare. We tend to market it as, well, the GIS folks handle that. The GIS folks handle the GIS side of next gen. But there are a lot of different ways that the GIS folks can handle it. And sometimes if GIS folks don't have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to script or develop those models or come up with a good ETL process, that's another way that we can meet them where they're at and help them get to where they need to go by furthering education in those areas as well. So those two things on people, and then trying to match good tools from the toolbox with where you find people, where they're at, and trying to understand their journey and their path forward.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Megan, Sherry, and Matt for your time. We are at the top of the hour. I have noted the questions that we unfortunately didn't have time for, and again, we'll get answers for those and send them out to the participants. This has been recorded and will be posted on the URISA Connect when it is ready. There are also some useful links that have been put in the chat box. One is the kind of frequently asked questions, good information put out by URISA. And then Matt also put up the dashboard, which is really fantastic, that Virginia has made up. And so with that, I will let you all go for the day, and thank you all for attending this Ask the Experts panel. Thank you.